The Gleaming Depths update introduced a whole host of new content, including so many different weapons. In the last video, we covered the decent but lackluster Cauterizer, so if you haven't seen it, make sure you do. It'll be in the description. And today, we'll be covering the newly added unique gauntlet, the Drill Fist. Is this weapon a letdown, or is it a diamond in the rough? Let's figure that out together. And now, I know a lot of you are already wondering, why did Bethesda add this thing? But I promise this thing may pack a punch, may not pack a punch. Let's get into it right now. Before we get into the weapon itself, let's talk about how you could get your hands on one of these bad boys. And if you can't tell already, you could get it from the Gleaming Depths raid, but specifically you could get it from Stage 2 of the raid, and it has a 10% drop chance, the weapon itself. Now, the plan for the weapon has a 5% drop chance and can also be obtained from Stage 2 of the raid. So now, obviously, I know it's a raid weapon. Don't freak out, though. I promise it's a pretty easy weapon to get, even if you're a lower level player, because chances are you could probably get a carry or two through the raid enough times to get one of these. So just try to join random raid teams if you're a low level and pray you don't get kicked. Like I said, someone will carry you through the raid, and I have gotten a shit ton of these things, literally like hundreds of them. I think that the drop rate is higher than 10%, but obviously I know it's not. It just feels like it because this thing drops so frequently. I get it like every other time I run the raid. Now, is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? We're going to have to talk about that with the testing and the performance of this weapon. But before we talk about performance of this weapon, let's go ahead and talk about legendary effects. I'll go through each effect real quick, and then I'll talk about it a little bit more in depth and talk about if it has any synergy and what perks work well and everything like that. So it should be up on the screen, but as you can see, we have the anti-armors effect, which is 50% armor penetration. We have the crippling effect, which is 50% more limb damage. We have the strength effect, which is +3 strength, a really nice one, always nice to have. That increases the overall damage of this weapon, and it also increases your carry weight. And then we have the Combo Breaker's new 4-star legendary effect, and when dealing damage, 50% chance to not use action points, 10% chance for auto melee weapons. And then obviously all of the raid weapons have additional effects that aren't legendary effects. So this one is target takes 23 fire damage per second for 3 seconds. Then up next, its target takes 2 damage for 3 seconds. And then we have the plus 15% additive damage, and then -5 durability, which is pretty standard for all of these other raid weapons. So those are the legendary effects. As you can see, this weapon is trying to achieve pure damage and functionality in the wasteland. And let me just say, it definitely achieves those things in terms of gauntlets. Now, it's not in terms of all weapons, but in terms of gauntlets, it 100% captures what it's trying to do. This thing is a powerhouse. You can equip mods for even more damage, like the ultrasight bits and the bladed tips, but without any mods or even perks, this thing could output some serious damage for a gauntlet. If you don't one-shot most of your targets, you'll definitely leave them almost dead with a broken limb, and then the fire could eat the rest of them alive. Now, even with tougher mobs, it still does okay because of that armor. And then the 4-star legendary effect isn't the best in the world because this thing costs such few AP to use. You just go nuts without having to worry about it, at least with my build. But it is nice. You'll sometimes not have to use any. It is really a really nice effect, though, on automatic melee weapons because that's how automatic melee weapons function. They use your AP. Additionally, again, I wanted to mention that base fire damage. Fallout 76 is trying to branch out with their damage over time weapons, like most MMOs, and I think that this is a perfect example because this thing does so much raw damage on most enemies per hit. The fire dot can actually kill your target. Now, that's in terms of a gauntlet. Obviously, a fixer, a railway, or an auto axe is going to beat this thing into the ground with any other perks or any other effects on there. But this thing for a gauntlet is pretty decent. It's probably one of the best unique gauntlets in the game, not including the Deathclaw gauntlets. Now, real quick, again, before we get into the testing and seeing if this thing shreds or if it's a huge miss, I just wanted to talk about the base stats of this weapon. For base stats, level 50, no damage perks and no mods boosting damage, we're looking at a 50 damage base plus 10% or plus 10 times your strength. The speed is medium, and the AP cost is 40. And then I also wanted to mention the look of this weapon, like I normally do for all these raid videos. I love a good looking weapon, and all of these raid weapons look really dope. However, this is the worst looking one. It still looks cooler than most gauntlets, again, besides the Death Claw ones, but it's still pretty boring compared to all the other raid weapons. So sorry, Drill Fist, but you're looking kind of lame, honestly. Now let's see if the performance of this weapon can make up for how shitty this thing looks. Let's jump right into the waters and talk about testing with this bad boy. The performance. If you saw my last raid video or any of my other weapon reviews, I'll start with how the gun is against lower level, weaker enemies, and work our way up to how this thing is against bosses and everything like that. So, like I said, starting off with your basic low-level weak mobs, like your mole miners, your human enemies, your ghouls, and Scourge, this thing is basically a one-hit without any damage perks. Like I said, for a gauntlet, this thing can output some solid DPS. Again, in terms of a gauntlet, I know someone in the comments is going to say, well, I mean, my fixer could do more damage. Yeah, no shit. This thing isn't a gun, and it's a gauntlet. So again, if you don't ever plan on using unarmed or gauntlet builds, then you're not going to want to go after this weapon, and I completely understand. You are going to come across it in your travels, though, if you are running the raids, because, again, this thing does drop from stage 2. So I suggest you at least keep it and throw it inside of your stash there. So now... This may not be the most fun weapon to come out of the raids, but it does the job in terms of killing those weaker, low-level enemies. If you ever wanted to Falcon Punch a ghoul across the wasteland, now's your chance to do it, and this thing will do it no problem. Like I said, one of the better gauntlets in the game, probably the best gauntlet in the game, excluding a couple of the Deathclaw ones. Now, moving on to the next class of enemies like Super Mutants and Snallygasters, some higher armor enemies, this thing still does decent work. It obviously drops off a little bit, but honestly, again, it has enough raw damage to take away a decent chunk of their health, and that damage over time from the fire will come in and hopefully finish off the remaining health of the super mutant you just hit. Now, there are better options out there for melee weapons, but again, this is a solid option for those who do want to use gauntlet weapons late game for some odd reason, if you're doing a challenge run, or if you just want to use something a little bit different. I know it's really no one that wants to do that, but hey, if you wanted to, do that, this thing is pretty solid against most basic mobs and slightly tougher enemies. But I also just wanted to cover your extremely tough boss type enemies like Marler Queen, Super Mutant Behemoths, and then Grafton Monsters, things like that. No surprise here, this thing really starts to drop off when compared to other melee weapons and other weapons. It's not the weapon's fault, unfortunately, but it's the fact that it's just the gauntlet. Gauntlets tend to drop off a lot at this point in the game for these enemy classes, so you obviously can still kill these types of enemies without too much of a challenge, really, but I mean, there are just so many better endgame options, and this is an endgame weapon. This weapon obviously wasn't meant to tangle with endgame or even pretty late game content, but if you only wanted to use this thing against basic mobs, it's a blast to use. Like I said, you could run around Falcon punching every single enemy. It's really nice. And then also, I wanted to mention how the Drill Fist is against your nuke type of bosses. So, like the Scorch Beast Queen or Earl or anything like that, Neurological Warfare. This thing obviously is not a main contender. I don't know if this isn't a shock to anyone. I would highly recommend using any other type of melee weapon. This thing will not be able to carry you through this content. Like I said earlier, it's not meant for in-game content. Even the Cauterizer is better against these bosses than the Drill Fist, unfortunately. It's just not meant for the late game. And then finally, in terms of performance, we all know this thing comes from the raids. It's obtained from the raids, stage 2, 10% drop chance. But I just wanted to talk about how this thing fares in the raids, and unfortunately it's not good. No melee weapon is, besides the auto axe and the first boss, but again, it's not really meant for bossing. It shines in low level mobbing situations, which is sad to say, because again, chances are you're probably not going to get this until you're a little bit of a higher level, and even if you are going to carry through the raids, and if you get another raid weapon, it's probably going to be better than this one, and you'll probably use that one over this one, unfortunately. Now that testing is over with, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, starting off with the good, or at least the biggest positive that comes with this weapon, in my opinion. Now, the biggest positive that I see with this weapon is just how good and how fun it is at mobbing. You are able to teleport all over the wasteland and bats with this thing, just like some of the other melee weapons in this game. Like I said, it's a gauntlet. It is pretty fun to use. Some people do get a kick out of running an unarmed melee build, so if you wanted to do that, this is kind of perfect for you. It does pack a nice punch, and it is a considerably easy weapon to get. All you have to do is just beat the first 2 stages of the raid. So yes, it is meant for endgame players, but of course you could get that carry through like it's nothing. So like I said, for basic mobs, you'll be able to one-tap them. It's basically just teleport to an enemy in VATS, one-tap them with your Flaming Fist of Fury, then teleport to the next enemy. It's a great melee weapon for clearing out hordes of one-tap enemies. And again, in the footage you are seeing, I don't have any damage dealing perks, unfortunately, besides Nerd Rage. So you can boost the damage on this thing even further, and you should be able to one-shot a lot more enemies. Now, just going off of how good this thing is for mobbing, like I said earlier, I just want to mention that this thing is probably the most fun that I've ever had with a gauntlet in Fallout 76. It feels like running around with a bloody gauntlet when the game first came out and just absolutely annihilating everything. It just feels so smooth when you're using it at VATS. It's not the best weapon in the world, or even a top 10, or even a top 100, but it is stupidly fun to use. So if Bethesda was trying to achieve that, they definitely did. However, though, the weapon is pretty dog shit. And then this isn't really a positive because it is a raid weapon, but the final positive that I see with this weapon is compared to the other raid weapons on this list, it is considerably easy to get. You only have to pass the drill stage and you can get this thing. Stage 2 of the raid is probably the easiest, and then obviously stage 1 people could get through within 35 seconds, and you have a good chance to get this a bad boy. Like I said, I've gotten this thing way too often. I've gotten hundreds of them from the raids, but again, you don't have to go through the whole raid to get this thing. It's pretty nice. That's probably one of the biggest positives that I do see. So even if you wanted to farm that 4-star legendary effect from this weapon, guess what? You can, because all you have to do is just beat stage 1, which will take 30 seconds with an auto axe, and then go ahead and beat stage 2, which you can do solo, but really you only need 2 people. If you watched any of my other raid-specific weapon videos, you know what I'm going to say. Every rose has its thorn, every yin has its yang, and every positive has its negative. There are obviously some bad features with this weapon, a lot more than others, so let's go ahead and talk about those right now. Now, obviously, I already know a lot of you are thinking this. The biggest negative with this weapon right off the bat is just how easily outperformed it is by so many other melee weapons. Again, the auto melee weapons just take a shit on this thing. I'm looking at you, Auto Axe, or again, even the Cauterizer, which is just a better melee weapon that you could get from the same raid, funny enough. It just realistically doesn't make sense to use this thing when there are so many better weapons, and even so many better weapons, melee weapons, just in this specific raid that you could get. So there you go. I mean, you know, again, there are just so many better options for raid content weapons than this thing out of the 8 raid weapons. You won't really ever use this thing unless you are a psychopath running around with an unarmed build, or if you're KevDoit making a Fallout challenge video. And then just to pair it with how easily outperformed this weapon is, it also starts to fall off ridiculously early because it can't compete with any other weapon outside of the basic mobbing weapons, which is kind of a huge letdown. But again, what do you expect from a gauntlet? That's what gauntlets are in Fallout. Even the Death Call gauntlets nowadays don't live up to the expectations of what they once did. No one's running around with a bloody Death Call gauntlet. And again, if you are one of those odd people that want to do an unarmed build or a gauntlet build, this is perfect for you. And then another negative I notice and see a lot of people talking about is just how useless the 4-star effect is on this weapon. In particular, the effect is awesome. Otherwise, it just doesn't have that much sense on this specific weapon. Like, it would have been better on the Cauterizer, but maybe not, because the Cauterizer's 4th effect is the only thing that's giving it damage. But unfortunately, Bethesda has been doing this with a lot of their 4-star legendary weapons. Like, you just put it on a weapon and it just doesn't fit, and this is almost like they barely playtest their game or anything like that when they add a weapon, because it's Fallout 76 and there's not that many people working on this. But nonetheless, the 4-star is good, but it's just bad on this weapon. And then the final negative working against this weapon that I could see is the unfortunate weapon class that it's in. Gauntlets are pretty low on the list of good weapons in Fallout 76, and having a unique one with okay effects doesn't really change the fact that it's from one of the worst weapon categories in the whole game. Plus, there aren't too many buff cards that this thing can benefit from, so you're shit out of luck. It's not like this is like a explosive laser weapon where you could throw in a couple of perk cards, or an explosive fixer where you could throw in a couple of perk cards to boost the damage of this thing. It just, you're kind of shit out of luck when it comes in so many different ways when it comes to this weapon, unfortunately. Like I said, it's a gauntlet, and that's probably the biggest negative about it. It just gets put in that wanted an unused category of weaponry, unfortunately, for Fallout 76. They're not what they used to be from Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 3. Well, ladies and gents of the Wasteland, we've made it to the end of another Fallout 76 video. As you can tell by this video, I think this weapon is okay, more on the bad side, but it's still usable. It's obviously not as good as a lot of other weapons in this game, and not as good as some of the weapons drop during a raid, but it could still kill enemies, I guess. I'm sure someone out there loves this weapon, and this is the best thing to come from their raid, in their opinion, because they've always wanted to do a crazy unarmed gauntlet build, and this weapon is finally making them do it. But that's not the case for everyone, unfortunately. This is probably the biggest flop of the raid weapons. Like I said, it still can kill some enemies, and it could still kill super mutant behemoths and everything like that, but considerably, it is probably the biggest letdown of the entire raid, in my opinion. I personally, not really a big fan. What do you think about this weapon? Let me know in the comments. What's your favorite raid weapon? Let me know in the comments. And as always, I just want to thank you motherfuckers for watching this motherfucking video, and I will see you in the Wasteland, hopefully running around with a better melee weapon than this shitty drill fist.